Thank you. Good to be here today in sunny San Diego. Anybody else come from the East? I came from Philadelphia. Anybody else have trouble getting out here? Yeah. I wasn't positive I was going to make this one last night, but it was one of the few flights to make it out. So good to be here. Thank you for attending the session today. This will be about innovation, quite a bit of AI, but automation as well. Innovation in general to accelerate manufacturing. I'm going to tell a little bit of a broader story and some anecdotal evidence as well, really ultimately about the future state. So I'll give some specific examples, talk about some use cases, my interaction with our customers, some of the feedback that we've gotten. Don't worry, I'll anonymize everybody. I won't reveal any names. But I'll provide some anecdotal evidence about what we see ultimately as the future state. You heard some of my background. I've spent 30 or so years in the industry in a few different capacities. Long ago at GE, from the automation layer, SCADA, MES systems, ERP for a long time, QMS systems at Honeywell, and Honeywell adds a buildings component as well. So it's an interesting mix and interesting perspective. And again, I'll keep it as topical and anecdotal from customer feedback and industry feedback as possible. So I'm going to start with some general voice of industry, voice of customer. This is a little bit of what we hear from reports like McKinsey or other analysts, our own observations with the industry in general. Some of it from our individual customer interactions, some of which are part of a customer advisory board as an example, or POCs, proof of concept, that we're engaged in. So I'll provide some of that background, some of the challenges that you all no doubt are facing. Then a little bit about some of the hard problems and the opportunities that we hear about. Curious on feedback there. And then, of course, any time that we need for Q&A. So let me start with the voice of the industry. So I think everyone would relate to most of these challenges. We see continued, not only regulatory pressure, but I'll just call it compliance complexity. We see some backlog in the EU with MDR and IVDR and notified bodies. Capacity very tight. There was a session this morning about the QMSR, and that's integration now with 13485. Many examples of customers that just in recent weeks that I've come across, 483s, warning letters, some consent decree. So definitely regulatory pressure ongoing, along with the sort of the FDA modernization, I'll call it. A big area of focus for us, one of the solutions that is very widely deployed in the industry is specifically for complaint handling, post-market surveillance in general, but complaint handling specifically we have many interactions, engaged in many workshops, deployment of the software, how we can further automate, apply AI agents specifically to complaint processing. It's the number one use case that we see. And the volume of that, I have one customer in particular, as I said, I won't reveal any names, but is dealing with a somewhat consumer-related business that's managing 1 million complaints a month. So 12 million complaints a year that they estimate will increase to something like 18 million complaints as the business grows. Just a massive scale of complaints that they're dealing with. And an example like that, we've had a number of discussions around cost per complaint as an example, and an opportunity to lower operating expenses. But that's not the aim that we really see. I'd be curious, even in the Q&A section, any perspective on that, because we don't see people necessarily taking out heads. If their complaint is, $150 a complaint or $200 a complaint, times that 12 million, we don't necessarily hear of them taking heads out of the call center, let's say, but being able to scale that business over the next 3 to 5 years with the same amount of people. That's a use case that we see, and as I said, really the number one use case, complaint processing, decent amount around root cause, as well as Kappa. I don't have to tell anybody about the world we live in today. The geopolitical risk goes without saying, but supply chain resilience, again, from our perspective, talking about either manufacturing or the broader supply chain, how that all applies. That's become a strategic imperative. It's no longer just an operational concern for the either med device, obviously for this audience, but for pharma as well. We talk quite a bit from a manufacturing perspective. I mentioned before, just 3 recent customers that I've had discussions with, field action or full-on recalls as a result of manufacturing issues. Overall complexity in manufacturing, we have a gentleman who was part of our customer advisory board that talked about some of the cold chain logistics that they're dealing with. This is more cell and gene therapy type solutions, but minus 190C and having to manage all of those logistics and the advanced manufacturing that goes into making a product like that. And really, I wanted to end with the AI governance and validation and just the overall uncertainty. In all the conversations that I have, in all of the workshops, the proof of concept that I mentioned, there's a great deal of uncertainty. Not knowing, there's a little bit of guidance, Annex 22 guidance from the FDA, but people aren't quite sure. People aren't quite sure what the regulatory framework is going to be. Everybody's talking AI, and there's a willingness there, but the adoption is slow, and how do we apply it? And again, I'll provide some of the use cases around that. I mentioned some of the voice of customer and industry intel. In general, we're seeing this agentic AI adoption moving toward autonomous agents, away from this sort of single-use AI models. That's a clear trend, along with the convergence of AI and automation. I mentioned the AI-powered complaint processing. Undoubtedly the number one use case. Our solution engineers team has about 20 in total that we're working on, either from the quality environment or from the manufacturing perspective. Just had a conversation earlier, data harmonization, lack of data harmonization, regulatory uncertainty. I mentioned almost 70% of customers are identifying unclear FDA guidance. And then manufacturing and supply chain complexity. I used that example before, the ultra cold chain, but even toward individualized manufacturing. Literally some cases where a drug product in this example is for an individual. This is a little bit of a lead in the McKinsey report that I'm going to talk about with some of the opportunities, some of the use cases. 75 to 85% of workflows can be enhanced by AI agents. This is something that we continue to see as well, that I've heard the term guardrails. Where do we put the guardrails? One customer used the phrase, "We're not quite sure when we can take our hands off the steering wheel." I personally, at this point, don't see a lot of full autonomous just happening. The adoption of that, I think, will be slow. The sense is the human needs to be involved. That's at least their perspective, customer's perspective on it, and thus far, the FDA as well. I mentioned the draft guidance issued by the FDA. One of the interesting topics regarding this is the notion of outcome-based pricing, that we're doing 2 or 3 co-innovation projects right now with customers to understand how this would all work. There are people that are used to buying either subscriptions or buying user licenses. Moving toward, as I mentioned, if we have a value-based argument where either headcounts could be repurposed or the cost per quality could be reduced, the number of complaints potentially reduced, gives the opportunity to naturally derive some value from that. And can we attach a value-based pricing approach to that or an outcomes-based approach? But that's not completely clear how all that would work. That generally, the conversations, people are amenable to it, but for a tradition of software licenses, let's say, it's not clear how all that pricing would work. The other big trend that we're starting to see here is the reshoring investment that is taking place. We have an intelligence team that has looked at all of the opportunity for, these are all public, so I'm not revealing anything, but large Lilly reshoring, Novartis, Braun, others that we're talking about from it feels a bit like the magnitude of this is more of a longer term kind of reorientation, I would say, rather than a response to short-term pressures. And this conversation is leading to a future state for, well, what do the new facilities look like? I'll touch on this a little bit later, but what do these new facilities look like, and can we get to a point where the building and the environmental controls, building controls, et cetera, are integrated with the manufacturing, integrated with quality, AI enabled at the edge where a sensor lives or where the automation lives. So this reshoring and bringing manufacturing, device and pharma manufacturing back to the US, driving a number of these conversations. So that's a little bit of background. Let me talk about some of the opportunities and the potential here. So I mentioned the McKinsey report that talked about 75 to 85 agentifiable workflows identified for processes that can be augmented or automated by agents. This is a value driver, particularly for the freed up enterprise capacity, the second one. But this is, from our perspective, this is not just about more tools necessarily. This is a new operating model where the agents can get deployed. I've used, the edge opportunity as an example, or the complaint processing. But there's really a view of this that if we have this across the facility itself, across manufacturing, across quality, this can literally be these AI sidekicks that are not replacing people. As I mentioned before, I'd be curious, after or sometime during the event on people's perspective on this, because we're not quite seeing heads being taken out rather than repurposed. At least that's the part of the discussions we're having today. I mentioned the freed up enterprise capacity. And again, some of the use cases we've discussed and some of the feedback from customers had been that this is a value creation. It's a competitive differentiator for them. It's allow them to improve the manufacturing operations, potentially affect batch release, or even move toward something like continuous manufacturing. I feel like that's been talked about in the industry for a long, long time now. So not sure we're quite there yet, but those are some of the opportunities for AI in life sciences that we come across. So these initiatives are kind of these impact pillars to affect a couple of things around optimizing product quality overall, maximizing product efficiency, of course, increasing patient safety, continuity of supply, reduced regulatory pressures. So some of the examples that we've seen are something like efficiency and productivity. So I use that example of complaint processing being one of the larger ones. So there is potentially some operational savings there, but it's really about reduced cycle times, some of the metrics that they're using. The lower overall cost of quality is a driver around the complaint processing in particular. I mentioned manufacturing, so some of them that we're starting to see is visual inspection. If you have integrated quality and manufacturing data, someone asked this morning, can you take some of that post-market surveillance data and bring it back to the manufacturing process, bring it back to understand where product defect might have occurred. Maybe it's in the design stage, but also potentially in the manufacturing stage. And using edge AI use cases like that, like maybe for visual inspection, generally much more effective and efficient and less error prone than a human. So that can help impact recalls. It could potentially speed batch cycle times. We heard some examples in our recent cab about incredibly expensive batches of product that naturally, if they can release quicker or release by exception, has a huge impact, and of course, overall patient safety. Innovation or differentiation. So one of the use cases we see is preventative maintenance, helping drive efficiencies and preventing critical equipment failures or outages, getting toward, as I mentioned, continuous manufacturing. That's been talked about for a while, but agents do open up the possibility for that to happen. Reduce downtime and higher overall equipment efficiency. And lastly, just from a regulatory perspective and having integrated manufacturing and quality, assuring supply chain continuity or at least reducing the risk, easing some of the regulatory burdens. So these are kind of the big strategic impact pillars. The opportunities, more specifically, that we see around this, I mentioned agentic AI on the edge, specifically to automate manufacturing processes. So this one is a good example of augmenting the work being done by an operator, maybe in a manufacturing execution system, or more edge-related, being at a sensor level or at a controller level, getting toward autonomous execution for overall operating efficiency. One of the clear use cases for us. Avoiding quality deviations, coordinating different recipes on the same production line. Lots of opportunity here for improvements in manufacturing, even if it doesn't fully move toward autonomous or continuous manufacturing, but clear opportunities here around autonomous or continuous manufacturing. Tech transfer, this is one where a common use case we've heard around this. We're seeing more applications and more of the proof of concepts I've talked about for digital twin deployment. So scale up digital twin process models as an example to get better prediction, better understanding of how processes will behave, and having a better overall prediction for tech transfer, and of course, minimizing overall validation overhead. One of the themes we hear running throughout this is the novel devices that we're seeing more of. They could be combo products or other devices. Some of the individualized products that I talked about before really require this shift from traditional operations. And this goes back to what I was referring to with some of the reshoring and the conversations that we're having, that what a fully digital facility looks like, from the buildings to manufacturing to quality, even cybersecurity, with AI agents deployed throughout. Another one, closed loop integration between quality and manufacturing, so getting toward continuous process verification, so monitoring of things like critical to quality attributes, reference back to the golden batch, right, to ensure compliance, and then deviation tracking to mitigate process risks. That's one of the more common use cases we come across as well. From a predictive quality, this is another one that has been talked about for some time, but the shift from quality by testing to quality by design. I think AI gives us an opportunity to get closer to that by things like simulated audits. As an example, I mentioned some of the digital twin application for the processes themselves. Release by exception. This is something that years ago, in the context of MES conversations, the discussion around continuous manufacturing came up. Release by exception, getting faster batch release or product release. I hadn't heard about that in any significant detail until more recently with deployment of these AI agents, and could we get toward true release by exception, reference back to a golden batch, et cetera. So that's an opportunity that we hear frequently. And then lastly, I talked about sidekicks before. So AI-enabled guidance for the frontline workers, for the operators. So this, in my mind, takes something like MES to the next level and providing actual guidance to an operator versus work instructions, let's say, or equipment availability, or making the frontline workers, reducing time to expertise through AI guidance, and fundamentally really just deploying those agents throughout the process. And truly, I think sidekicks is a good way to put it, that it doesn't take the humans out of the mix, it doesn't take them out of the equation, but it does augment what they're already doing. So these are some of the sort of top use cases, either touching quality or touching manufacturing or touching buildings overall. So there's a view of this that we have, and we've been testing this with some customers and having discussions about, even in the context, specifically in the context of the reshoring and the factory of the future sort of concept. And that is really an integrated and modular facility, manufacturing, and quality ecosystem that's AI enabled. We view this as sort of an ideal future state. So if you think about building automation and environmental control, so naturally that's going to encompass things like fire and safety, and security and access control. Naturally, all of this, by the way, depending on where the use case resides, has AI or agentic opportunity throughout all of these individual areas themselves. So if we look at from a manufacturing environment, from a GMP facility, even if cold chain logistics isn't present, or something as extreme as some of the examples that I gave before, the view toward just the overall environmental control and building automation, especially if we're in a situation where it's a greenfield, potentially a brownfield type of opportunity. But certainly in a greenfield situation, there's an opportunity here to develop this solution. We have in discussions now with a smaller startup that initiated with a QMS discussion, document management in particular, but moving toward broader QMS, that some of the conversations moved into a manufacturing discussion, which then moved into a buildings discussion. So it's very early days on that one and on some of the reshoring ones that I mentioned previously, but there is a view toward starting with this whole building automation, environmental control, and then integrating that with traditional or AI-enabled batch automation, manufacturing execution, having that integrated from a facilities perspective. I talked about things like predictive maintenance, ensuring equipment availability, predicting potential equipment failures that could possibly affect product quality or patient safety. And then even, I mentioned the digital twin example before for modeling on different processes, but OT cybersecurity is one that we've seen a significant uptick in, and that's specifically separating the IT infrastructure from the operational infrastructure to ensure, a hack or a security breach or otherwise. So that's a component of this as well, and usually part of the sort of facility of the future discussions. I mentioned this morning, the question about the post-market surveillance and the quality data that may come, or complaint data that may come from that post-market surveillance. A lot of questions about, can we integrate that back into the manufacturing? What would that look like? Can an AI agent help with that? Can the complaint data itself help drive innovation or reduce design defects or manufacturing defects? So true integration between all of those systems, having those solutions modular, as I mentioned, but integrated toward driving some of these use cases that I mentioned before. And then finally, underpinning all of this is sort of the operations control center. So this is where, utilizing some of the analytics I talked about, can we get toward better predictive quality? Can we get toward real-time release, as an example, or overall optimization of batch manufacturing? So this is sort of the future state, again, that we're envisioning, a lot of this being driven from the use cases that have come to us or the ongoing conversations that we have. I'm certainly happy to have further discussions and welcome anyone's feedback or comments or perspective on these. And with that, I think we have a couple minutes for questions. Yes? Quiet group. Of the agents themselves?
When you launch an agent or you put a workflow into an agent, what it will take to maintain that later on?
The agent itself. Yeah. Do you mean from a validation perspective or just the life cycles? The validation.
Maybe new generations coming out of the market, what will be the lifespan of
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
What do we know about that?
Yeah, it's not a lot. I can tell you it's some of these co-innovation opportunities that we're working with customers is they don't really have a good handle on it, and we have no usage of production deployed, fully scaled agents, certainly not autonomous. We had a discussion this morning about validation and then what are the validation touch points if the model continues to learn, does it need to be revalidated? And then if so, when? So not a great deal at the moment. That's where some of this is, the sense I get from these proofs of concept and very risk-averse organizations is it's really kind of dipping the toe in and taking this very, very slowly, keeping humans in the loop. So not a whole lot to your point, and what the service life, so to speak, could be. Sure. All right. All right. Thank you.